Welcome to Ashok IT. So in this video, we are going to cover a full lecture on exception handling in Java. Errors happens anytime, but what matters is the way we handle and rectify them to maintain the normal flow. So Java being the most prominent object-oriented language that provides a powerful mechanism to handle all these errors, exceptions. And effective exception handling makes your program more robust and easier to debug. So in this session, I will talk about the fundamentals and the various methods of Java exception handling. So let's look at the topics to be covered in this session. So first and foremost, I will tell you what exception handling is. Then I will give you a compilation between the errors and the exception. Then I will give you an overview on exception hierarchy. And then you will also understand the difference between the checked and the unchecked exceptions. After on this thing, we are going to cover like what the programming part is and we'll cover the programming part. Once we are done with the basics syntax, then we'll explain the types of exceptions in it. After that, we'll dive into the various methods of the exception handling along with the examples. And I will wrap this session by giving you a difference between the throw and throws. Also, I will explain about the finally, and the finalize. Also, we will be seeing about the custom exception and how to pass an exception. So let's begin the discussion and see you what exception handling is. So exception is a problem that arises during the execution of the program. So if I talk about in very basic language, so imagine you are baking cookies and you accidentally run out of choco chips. So instead of giving up, not making cookies at all, what you decided? You decided to use raisins or nuts as a substitute. So in this scenario, the unexpected problem is running out of chocolate chips. Your backup plan is to use raisins and nuts instead. So in if we talk in a programming language, it's similar. Exception handling is the similar kind. It's a way your computer program to deal with unexpected issues or errors without crashing completely. When something expected like unexpected happens, so what happens, it will continue running and providing the useful errors message instead of shutting down. Means it will not shut down completely, but it will provide some errors. So in simple terms, if I say exception handling is like having a backup plan in case of something goes wrong when a computer is running. So it can occur for like many different reasons. Say a user has entered a invalid data, or a file that needs to be opened cannot be found, or you can also say that a network connection that has been lost in the middle of the communication, or the JVM has run out of memory. So many such cases are there. But if we do not handle them, it leads to a system failure. So handling an exception is very important, and that's where Java introduced exception handling mechanism. That is to handle the runtime errors so that the normal execution flow will not be disrupted. For example, class not found, we have IO exception, we have SQL exception, we have etc. Now let's move ahead and see the difference between the errors and the exception. So first, errors are the impossible to recover, but exception can be recovered by handling them. Next is errors are out of type unchecked, but exception can be checked or unchecked. And just wait, you will know what actually the checked and unchecked exceptions are. So later I'll explain you about it more clearly. So errors are something that happens at runtime, but exception can happen either at compile time or at runtime. So exception are caused by the application itself, whereas errors are caused by the environment on which the application is running. So these are the key points of the difference between the errors and the exceptions. Now let's see what exception hierarchy is. So all the exception and the errors types are the subclasses of a class throwable, which is the base class of the hierarchy. So here one branch is headed by exception, and this class is used for exception conditions that the user program should catch. For example, say null pointer exception, runtime exception, etc. And other branch error are used to, like the Java runtime system, to indicate the errors that has to do with the runtime environment itself, that is JRE. For example, virtual machine error or stack overflow error, etc. So how Java virtual machine handles exceptions? Wherever, like inside a method, if an exception has occurred, then the method creates an object known as exception object and hands it off to the runtime system. And this exception object contains name and description of the exception, and also the current state of the program where the exception has occurred. And creating the exception object and handling it to the runtime system is called the throwing an exception. So then using the try catch finally methods, these exceptions can be handled. So this is how Java virtual machine handle the exceptions internally. Let's now check the difference between the checked and the unchecked exceptions. And in simple terms, if we say exceptions that happen at the compile time are the checked exception like IO exception, etc. Runtime exceptions are those which occurs at the runtime exception, like divide by zero are out of bound. These all are the null pointer exception. So basically, unchecked exceptions are built-in exceptions in Java. So checked exceptions cannot be simply ignored. The programmer should handle these exceptions, and runtime exceptions are ignored at the time of the compilation. Now, let's see the basic example of the exception. So here I have defined the class, and inside the main method, I have try block. So in this try block, the code that we are going to write is that having the exception. That is, it contains the code that raised exception. And then the raised exception will be handled in the catch flow. So let's see a small program as how it occurs. So here I have created one new package named as exception handling. So in that package, I have made one class, that is that new class named as exception example. So first thing first, what I'm going to do it, I'm going to write the main method. Okay. So now here I'll create a string str and make it as null. So now after this, I will try to retrieve the length of the string. So when I execute this program, it will throw an exception. Why? Because string is null and we are trying to retrieve the length of the string. You can check it. So as I said, it throws null pointer exception because the string is null. It does not contain any values. So now let's use try and catch method to handle this exception. So what I'm going to do it here, in try block, I'm going to write a code that will raise an exception. So I've given A as 30 and B as 0. So now I'll try to define a number, like I've tried to divide a number by 0, that is C is equal to A by B, like that. So what happens here? So if we try to divide a number by 0, so then it says we cannot divide a number by 0 because it raises an arithmetic exception, correct? So let's see how that occurs. Now, as it throws the exception here, what I'll do to maintain the normal flow of execution, I will write the catch block to handle the exception. That is arithmetic exception. Now, uh, after that, let's print it out. Yeah. So let's comment this because okay. Now let's check this program. So what we got now? We got can't divide a number by. So now tell me one thing, like I have declared the integer number and I'm trying to pass the string variable. So it's obvious it will throw the exception. So in order to maintain the normal flow, we have to handle this exception. So I'll use the catch block and I'll handle the number format exception. This is done here. So now let execute and see. So first is the cannot divide by 0 because we have handled the arithmetic exception. And next we handle the number format exception. So next we will see how array index out of point exception occurs and how it can be handled. Okay. Now I'll try to access a seventh element in the array. So we have cached it and array index out of bounds. Now again, let's execute. See, so as I said, again the array index after bounds exception got handled and it printed the output. So this is how built-in exception are present in Java libraries. Okay. So now let's see each of them. First, try. So try block is used to enclose the code that needs the exception. The syntax is as follows. As you have already seen, it's very simple. We write a code that throws exception and we can handle it using the catch block. And next is nested try. So nested try block is nothing but a try within a try block. For example, you can see here I have declared one try and inside that I have created one more try catch and then there is one more try as well. I have modified this code here, the same code. So here we have one try block and two different catch block. Let's execute and see. So first is it printed number format exception and then it printed other statement. Why this exception did not get handled? Because there was no any exception that is mean for through this. So if there was any exception that was thrown, so that would have been handled. So this is how you can use multiple catch blocks. Now let's go to next and see the finally. A multi-catch. That is, if you have to perform various tasks that at the occurrence of the various exception, then you can use Java multi-catch block. So here you can see you have one try block and you have multiple catch blocks. So let's see how that works. So here I have one try block and two different catch blocks. So let's execute this and see. So first printed number format exception, then it printed other statement. So why this exception, this one is not get handled? Because there was no any exception that was being thrown for this. Okay. So if there was any exception that was thrown, then would have been handled. So this is how you can use multiple catch blocks. Okay. Now let's move to finally. Now we'll see finally. So finally is a block that is used to execute important code such as closing connections, streams, etc. No matter whether exception is handled or not, finally block will always be executed. So in the previous example, you saw that after declaring a try block, you must use catch block to maintain the normal flow. But while using finally block, the catch block is not required. So now let's see how. So what I did, I have modified the code again and I removed all the catch blocks here. And now I have the try block itself. So now what I'll do, I'll use finally and then I'll print the statement. this one. Okay, so now let's execute it. So as I said, we have not used catch block. It throws the exception, but even on throwing the exception, the flow will not destruct it because we have used the finally block to execute the code. So you can see the finally block is always executed. So that's how it works. Now next let's move to the throw. What is throw? Now let's see what is throw. Throw is nothing but a keyword that is used to throw an exception. So you can see the syntax here. Inside a method, you are throwing the exception. Let's see how it throws the exception. So what I'll do, first I'll define the function here. So inside the throw block, I'm going to throw the arithmetic exception. Okay, throw new arithmetic exception. Okay, I'll write sample or I'll write example just. Okay, so now let's handle the exception using catch block. So we have x out exception caught. So now what I'll do, I'll close this average function. I'll call the main method here. What I'll do now, I've closed this. Let's call the function in the main method. So first I have thrown the exception in the try block and then I catched it. After that, like this is done, I have called this function, and after calling I have done this. Okay, and now what I'll do, catch the entire function. So let's first see what it will be without it. Let's check the output now. Okay, so what we got in output, it's just a like the exception is being caught. Correct? Why? Because when we call the average function in the main method, then it goes back to the loop and exception will be thrown by the it it being catched. So this is how throw is used to throw the exception, and it can be handled in the catch block. Okay, simple. Okay, now let's move to the throws. Let's see what is throws. So throws is also a keyword which is used to declare the exceptions. It does not throw any exception, but it specifies that there may occur any exception in the method, and it is always used with the method signature. Let's see how. And again, I'll motivate the program itself that I have told. It is always used with the method signature. So I'm going to use a throws keyword along with the method. Let's see what is throws. So here what I'm doing, I'm using throws keyword along with the method. Okay. So, and also I'm using a throw keyword to throw the new arithmetic exception. Okay. Now the next thing is, okay, now inside the main method, I'll use the try block. So let's make it out. We have throw new exception, then I've written this. So inside this main method, let's write a try block and apply finally here. Okay. So this is an example wherein I'm using the throw keyword along with the method signature. And inside this, I'm throwing a new exception. But when I'm calling the method or function inside the try block in main method, it will throw an exception. So instead of handling it, I'm just printing the finally. So let's see what happens. So you can see here, first the inside average function is printed, and then it says that there is an exception in the main method. See, so that is we are throwing an exception. As we are not handling that, at that it's printing the finally block. So it's simple. So this is how throws is used. Let's see the difference between throw and throws. So first, throw is explicitly used to throw an exception, but throws is used to declare an exception. We have already seen how it worked. Next, check exception cannot be propagated using only throw, but checked exceptions can be propagated using throws. Throw is followed by an instance, whereas throw is followed by a class. And throw always used within a method, and throws is used with a method signature. Throw can throw only one exception, not multiple exceptions, while throws can declare multiple exceptions. Just for we saw how it worked. So let's check next. We'll see the difference between final, finally, and finalize. So final is a keyword, final is a block, as we saw, and finalize is a method. Final is used to apply restrictions on class, methods, and variables. But finally is used to place an important code. And finalize is used to perform cleanup processing just before the object is garbage collected. Coming to final, final class can't be inherited, final method cannot be overridden, and the final variable cannot be changed. Coming to finally, so it will be executed whether the exception is handled or not. We already saw how it worked. Now let's see a user defined exception. Sometimes the building exceptions in Java are not able to describe the certain situation. In such cases, a user can also create exceptions, and that are called user defined exceptions. So there are two important points. First, a user defined exception must exchange the exception class. The second one, the exception is thrown using a throw keyword.